Great. Well, thanks. So appreciate folks joining. I see Jim is already over there on site, ready to go, and we will see him as we go through the tour of grounds. So yeah, Expo 93, kind of interesting one, a 3-month expo. When you look at it, you go, I've always thought it was like the 64 World's Fair, being astonished that they would tear it down after 2 years, which was really, as we know, 1 year of exhibition time. But to think that you would tear down a fair after just 3 months of time is truly astonishing. And it turns out there's all sorts of different ways you can get yourself approved by the Bureau of International Expositions. They have all different types of categories of World's Fairs where they have, category 1, 2, and 3. They call them sponsored fairs or exhibitions, or they have flower shows or whatever. And in their most minor category, you can get approval for a show that goes, the shortest that they'll approve is 3 weeks, and then up to 3 months. So in this particular case, the organizers of the one in Korea went for the 3-month window. It actually, I think, was 97 days in total. And they did this for a real purpose. They wanted to have fun with the World's Fair, but not also go bankrupt. And they thought trying to drag this thing out for 6 months is going to be iffy, because back in 1993, and even today, a lot of people do not go to Korea for vacation. So if you put this thing together and you have a certain amount of people and you think that they can all come in 3 months, why do you run it out for 6 months? Because your expenses to operate it are going to be higher, but your attendance is not going to be any greater. So they did a real analysis. Matter of fact, the committee that put this together analyzed everything. They had data mining of the nth degree. And even afterwards, they would come down and tell you exactly how many kids of what age got lost, how many wallets got turned in. I mean, they really went way out of their way to crunch numbers and figure out how this thing went. But it started right before the Olympics. In 1988, they had the Olympics in Seoul. And in 1987, they started getting the idea about the Olympics look like it's going to come along well, no significant snags. So what else can we do to put Korea on the map? During the time they started looking at this, Korea was very jubilant. They had just passed the milestone of the average income per person in the country was $7,000, which is obviously not a lot by American standards, but it was a real milestone for them. Their economy had been primarily agrarian, and they were trying to get more into manufacturing. So they had the concept of a World's Fair, just like so many others did, would be able to show the world what they had to offer, both in terms of talent, natural resources, and also their willingness to be a trade partner. So they joined the BIE in 1987, and Korea had previously exhibited other World's Fairs, and that gave them the impetus for a fair for 1993, because that would mark the 100th year since Korea had first put a pavilion in any World's Fair. So they went out and they made a pitch to the BIE, and there was nothing else big going on. There were, I think, 1 or 2 other small exhibitions around that period of time, but the BIE said, yeah, you can do it. We'll give you the okay for the 3-month window, and they were off and running. So the theme for this one, and you get things translated, hopefully you get it right, but the theme for this one was the challenge of a new road of development. There was also a second name that they had here, theme. I'm just going through my notes here. Let's see. Traditional and modern science and technology for the developing world, and effective use of resources and recycling. And that became one of the big themes that they went on. This was the whole concept of recycling. They wanted to, people having a problem with audio or something in chat? I see no problems at the moment.
It's on my end, Bill. I'm getting you're freezing every 15, 20 seconds. I'm trying to find it. Don't worry about it.
So we will make Don think he's having problems. No. So anyway, they went off and they put this fair together, and it was kind of interesting. What they did was they got themselves in trouble for one of the things they did. They were looking to develop a science city. This was the same sort of thing they had done, Scuba Expo 85, where you start building new cities out in the middle of nowhere and start trying to attract industry and technology and brain trust out there. So the fellow had been running for president of Korea, had made a big point that everybody in Korea everybody in the world knows Seoul, but they don't know the rest of Korea. And I'm going to do something to put Central Korea more on the map. And his idea was to build this science city. Well, they did not tell the BIE all their particular plans of what they were doing, and it turned out the Science Center boundary was indistinguishable from the Expo site. And the BIE got upset with them to the point where they were threatening to cancel the endorsement of the fair because they said you're blurring the line between a World's Fair and a trade show, a pure technology driven, come out and look at our buildings and become tenants sort of thing. So they had to do some fancy dancing at the end. They got it done, and it left some sort of poor feelings with the BIE, but they later gave that, and they had another one about 10 years ago in Korea. Matter of fact, they're talking about trying to have a big one. But they picked an area called Taejon. Back then, Korea, again, I will not try to do the Korean pronunciation of some of these things, but it was Taejon. They recently have decided that that was the wrong anglicizing of the pronunciation, so it's now Daejon. So if you start looking for things about Taejon, Expo 93, sometimes you don't find them. You got to look them for Dijon at Expo 93. Well, let me just start here with a few pictures. Let's see, share a screen. Come on. Share screen. Okay. So the easiest thing to start when you're doing your World's Fair is to come up with a logo. And this was one that they did. If you know the typical Korean symbol, looks like yin yang, a blue and a orange circles kind of meshed together. In this particular one, they took that Korean symbol, but they also superimposed it over a blue earth. So you had the yellow and white, the yin and the yang, superimposed over a blue earth. The whole theme of this was going to be about recycling and trying to live in a greater harmony with the planet. So they came up with the logo. They started using variations of it on promotional material, and they were off and running. They were very determined, and they were very successful in their determination of a true World's Fair. They did a tremendous amount of marketing, as we'll see, for international organizations and companies to join, and they were very proud of the fact of the high number of international participants. They had twice as many countries exhibiting at Expo 93 as Vancouver had at Expo 86 for comparison. They also, again, they concentrated mostly on countries and some Korean industry. They didn't go for a lot of other industry, but they really went out of their way to get people signed up. They were also very proud of the fact that they billed themselves as the first expo given to a developing nation. However, there's a lot of, well, that's self-serving in that because Haiti had previously done something in the 40s, and Haiti obviously is still a developing nation. So this is what they came up with. This is a map of the fairgrounds. There's a river going, again, this city, and we'll go a little bit more into getting out there. It's about an hour-and-a-half ride away from Seoul. They built this fairground. On the bottom, you have a giant parking lot. Up top, the main fairground. And then they had a bridge that's right smack in the middle of it. We'll see pictures of that going over there. Up at the very top where it's green, that's an area called Expo Land. That's the amusement park area we'll be taking a look at. And then you had West Gate and then East Gate. You can see, if I'm moving my mouse around, the little arrows here, the two gates. More bus parking lot. Not many people came out by car because a lot of people in Korea did not have cars. And it was a big reason the automotive pavilion was of great interest to people. But it was also far away from everything, so that they brought a lot of people in by bus. The area did not have a lot of hotels because there was nothing out there before they decided to build this. So a lot of people stayed in Seoul. They came out by bus or by train, and they organizers also started organizing their version of Airbnb. They were making it very easy for people to stay with people that lived out in the area or in a reasonable distance nearby from other villages. Most of those turned out to be Koreans. The overall guest count for Expo 93 turned out, I think 4.7% of the guests were foreign nationals. Quite a few of those from Japan and other countries that were closer to it. But the organizers pronounced themselves very pleased with the amount of international participation they did get. This was the mascot for it. His name was Condori, Kundori. He was described as a impish space elf. He was also described as Twinkle, the dream being. But he was a really interesting little character. He's obviously an alien type, and he's got a little satellite going around him. And we're going to see him on the site and fountains and things they did with him. And they sold some plush toys, and he was a popular little guy. So we're going to hop over to taking a tour of this place. Let me go back up and get the first set of pictures here. Okay. So I'm going to try to give you some information on what we see in all these. What's interesting is if you look right in the background of this, trees right outside. Unlike so many of the other fairs we've seen recently, it was not built right in the middle of an industrial area. For a change, it was not built on top of a disused rail yard like so many other fairs seem to have been. This, again, was pretty much out in the middle of nowhere. So as we see pictures at various angles, you have the fair, behind it you got green, on the opposite side was empty plains where they had cleared the ground and getting ready to build their industrial city. The local government pavilion was a way to show off what all the governments around there. It was just like in the United States, you have multiple layers of government. You have their equivalent of a town government, a county government, a state government, a national government. So all the local governments, I think there were 17 of them that joined together to sponsor in this pavilion. Off on the left, you can see the building is held up by a lot of the poles, the metal structure on the outside. There were both permanent and short-term buildings that were built on site. And some of these buildings, you look and you can see that they got their inspiration from other World's Fairs. So if you look at the building on the left, and if we were able to go and pop up a picture right now of Expo 86 in Vancouver, same sort of modular design. We can build a building, held it up from the outside, getting a lot of floor space inside for exhibits, and we can do this fairly economically and cheaply. And here's another example of seeing that. This is the Australia Pavilion off to the left. You could go if you were a big country like Australia with a lot of money to put into it. You could get a whole bunch of these modules and have a giant amount of space. If you were a smaller country, you could have a lesser number. And if you're a really small country, you could share it with other people. So you get provided basically a white building and with no interior, and then you would be responsible for coming up with your exterior design and all your exhibits. One of the walkways going through it, they had several international areas. Off to the left, we see these sail type roofs soaring up. That was one of the types. You had the other one, which we've just seen with Australia, so they broke them up, gave it a little bit of variety. This was the government pavilion. Some things also refer to it as the science pavilion. It's interesting that under the rules the BIE has, if you do one of these short 3-month exhibitions, for some reason you are not allowed to have a national pavilion with a national name. So you're not allowed to have the Korea Pavilion, or you wouldn't be allowed to have the United States Pavilion, but you can get around it and call it the government or the science pavilion and then fill it with exhibits about the government. So again, I don't understand why they have that prohibition, but they do, and there's very easy ways to work around it. This was one of the buildings that was built permanently, still out there. This is the theme structure. This is the Tower of the Great Light. It's interesting. They went way out of their way on this one. It is 93 meters high because this is Expo 93. And down below, it is covered in 1,993 granite blocks because that is 1993. It was designed as a permanent structure. It's still there today. It was done to honor an ancient observatory, and they had exhibits inside of how the old observatory worked. You could go up into it and other displays, and up at the top a restaurant. I do not believe it rotated though, although it may look it, but that is still there today. They now call it Handbit Tower in honor of the old observatory. Another closer view. And this is the Pavilion of Peace and Friendship. And I took notes on some of these, and each of them had a theme and a different sponsor. So let me just grab my notes here in this one real quick. And okay, this was to show you about international exchange and world peace. So there were 23 different organizations that banded together for this, including the United Nations, the African Development Bank, and the Olympics were the main ones in there. And it was designed to think about a giant dove. So if you look at it, you can see the wings kind of undulating, the beak of the bird in the center soaring up there, kind of interesting design. Another building was designed to be a permanent addition to the site. Another view of the tower. This is an interesting one here. This is the government pavilion again. And I don't know if it shows up too well in this picture, but I will zoom in on it and see. Now, this logo here, it doesn't show up too well. We'll see it in others, but it's actually labeled Souvenir Pavilion. So if you need to go and get your Condori plush toys or anything else, to make sure you had no doubt on where to go. USA Pavilion, very interesting thing about the USA Pavilion. They had committed to go into this back in the 80s, and then as soon as this thing started gaining momentum, but then we had the problem come along with things like Expo 86, Expo 85, the New Orleans World's Fair or whatever. The US at this point passed a law saying that the United States government would not commit any funds to the United States Pavilion. So I think it was Reagan had agreed to be at Expo 93, but now Clinton comes along and he's stuck in the situation, ain't got no money. So the US government asked private industry on their interest in helping. And a couple of companies came out, put together proposals and failed. And the one that came out and put together a proposal that did succeed was Amway Corporation. So Amway put together a proposal. They then put together a team. They literally went around with their hat in their hand, begging other companies to participate and provide money. And we came up with the USA Pavilion. And the USA Pavilion actually turned out to be pretty popular. It was getting about, I think they were saying 30,000 people a day, which was about 25% of the people there on the average day. Oh, by the way, Expo in 93 got slightly over 14 million people that attended. But the USA Pavilion was built around recycling. Again, Expo 93's main thing was recycling, and they really encouraged people to adhere to it. Some, just like when Carol and I designed a Rose Parade float, we try to come up with something that matches the theme. Others just come up with whatever they think is pretty. But the USA Pavilion got very high marks because people in Korea were getting very interested in the whole concept of recycling. You can see the line outside here for the pavilion. You will notice on many of the other pavilions, there is no line. People were able to go in, get out fairly easily. But USA was very popular. We'll see some of the other displays as we go through it. But in some of the other things, like when I went to Expo 85, I thought the USA Pavilion was disappointing. In this particular one, it came out to be very highly rated and got good both local and international press. Another view of the Australia Pavilion. You can see just how large it is. Again, they went with a number of these modules all linked together. Here's where joining Jim. He's at the Taejon, or now Dijon Pavilion. This was the local government for the area where the expo was being held. It was an important pavilion to them to try to act as a leasing agent for the futuristic city that they were getting ready to build, and the science city, and getting people to come and be part of it. So it's, again, if you are fans of other World's Fairs, think about the 1939 New York World's Fair and the US Steel Pavilion. Look just like this, an exterior dome supported by beams on the outside. And again, cheap to build, a lot of floor space, and pretty easy design. We have a Gold Star was the sponsor of the Skyway system, and Gold Star, of course, being a major electronic manufacturer over there. This particular one, I don't remember what they're waiting on the line for. And here's Condori, our mascot. He shows up in a number of places over here. This fountain was kind of interesting. We'll see it in operation. He could get lifted up on a hydraulics there, and the water would come racing out. In this particular case, they have water coming out of the top of his head instead of the little star that went with him. But Condori was very popular, and the Expo Corporation was very glad. They sold a lot of Condori merchandise. This is looking towards the west gate of the fair. This structure here is still there today, the west gate, and this is supposed to be symbolizing man's reach for the stars and the earth above, that we're going to soar above our domestic problems and be able to go. And if you go over there today to what's called Expo Land, you can still walk through this area. This here was the press center. If you were accredited to the press, they were very happy. They had almost 2,000 different reporters come through the facility during the 3 months of operation. They went very much in depth of tracking down how many articles were written on a local basis, how many were done in print, how many were done in television. They had a whole TV studio and everything inside here. And if you do go through and check most people's reactions, again, I can't read Korean, so I'm not sure what all what the Korean papers were saying. The New York Times did a piece on it, the newspaper in Washington State. Pretty much the US reaction of the people that did go was quite positive to it, although it was quite off the beaten path. Utility Center, the nerve center and brains of the operation, again, built as a permanent piece for the Science Center used for the fair operation. Let me go to my next set of slides here. So this one, again, you can see this one, if you, I should have had the time. I was working in this too late last night. I should have gotten pictures of some other World's Fairs to throw in here, but this would be a real match for the Transportation Pavilion at the Chicago 1933 World's Fair. So you just wonder how much some of these people had seen some of these things, or what research they did, or how they went with it. This is the World of Materials Pavilion. It was sponsored by a Korean company called Pohang Steel. And it was to show you how steel was going to be the great thing to do, but there were also other sorts of manufacturing materials that they would use. So they would show you demonstrations of certain things taken from raw materials, extracting the, if you use bauxite, you extract aluminum from it. If you have iron ore, you can go and turn it into steel. So it was a whole big thing done on how man and material coming out of the ground were linked together, that we could not survive without the plundering of some of these resources. This was kind of interesting one. It's called Earthscape, and Earthscape was a very interesting one. When I first looked at it, again, I don't want to harp too much, but it looks just like the UK Pavilion for Expo 58. This particular one, done by a company that I'm sure I'm going to mispronounce, Sangyong. It's Sanggyong. And the theme of this was the love and protection of the earth, the precious place of life. And this was a whole thing here. This was a large pavilion. It actually had an underground exhibit and 3 stories above ground. And it went on about how we have to be careful of our natural resources, and that if we're doing things like mining, we have to be aware of what happens to the debris that we cause. Paper products need trees planted to replace the ones that we use. So it was a very big push on living in careful coexistence with the earth. This particular one here is, you have a pavilion off on the right-hand side. We'll see more of it for later. We have an information booth, the big question mark up there. And then just like we saw in Seville, you had some greenery. You had these walkways out here with plants on them. The walkways are still there. The plants, just like Seville, are not there today. But this was held in the very end of summer over in Korea to not be terribly hot, but they did provide a good amount of shade out there on site. This kind of interesting one. This is the Recycle Arts Pavilion, and is basically a pavilion about recycling, and it was built out of things that were recycled. So this one was actually sponsored by the organizing committee of the Expo 93. This was a theme structure that they had out here. And everything in this was about recycling. So the metal top was made out of recycled metal, recycled plastics inside, exhibits inside all talked about how you needed to recycle your waste for compost heaps, whether or not you were going to recycle bottles, glass, that sort of thing. You could also see one of the things they did out there was misting around it, gave it kind of a off-world, sort of different sort of look. That also helped with some of the cooling in the area. Again, West Gate gives you a good size of the idea of the structure based on the people out here. Telecom, big pavilion here about, today, of course, we all have cell phones, all carry them around and everything. Back then, it was pretty much dial phones. I think maybe folks were just getting into, the cell world and everything. But this was a whole big thing. This was done by Korea Telecom. Their theme, let's break down walls and build bridges. And they were getting together, the internet was still pretty new and, I think people getting going. But they were trying to show how in a country like Korea, it was easy to link different villages together through telecommunications, and it was a lot easier than trying to build roads through some of the Korean mountains or over the rivers. So this another permanent building for the site. This was a kind of interesting one, Future Garden, and I have a shot. I have a different shot of another garden inside. This was a whole one done here about how we can start growing plants in a more earth-friendly environment, whether it's through hydroponics, crop rotation, things along that line. Another structure that was permanent last, I think this one was actually torn down just a few years ago, but kind of interesting thing, you have a fairly innocuous great building, but put this really neat looking lattice work around it, and you don't even stop thinking so much about the building behind it. We're out in the parking lot looking towards the gate. As I said, most people came by buses or by train. Not a lot of car parking out there. That up above that bluest dome building is the Maglev Pavilion. We'll see that more in the Maglev Train exhibit that ran. And as I said, people came by bus. You sure better make sure you got your bus number and your parking spot written down, or else you might be going home with somebody else and to a different city or something at the end of it. But kind of neat looking as you're walking in, going from the parking lot to the gate. They had all these different balloons and everything flying up ahead. Some souvenir stands and everything catch you on your way out to get a last minute souvenir. Some nice general views of the site. Let me jump over to the next thing slides here. And I mentioned Expo Land. They have a fun, you can still go today, you can still go ride the Ferris wheel. So over here in this one, we've got the Monorail Station off to the right. In some cases, they had English signage. Others, everything was in just Korean. So people that went over there said, though, that they were feel very much at home. As Westerners, the Korean people were very welcoming and very friendly to them. And again, got great reviews from people that went over. The little display, this is probably something on the other side of the sign there with a schedule or something to it. But kind of a neat view here. This is Expo Land. You got the Scream Machine roller coaster going in the back, the monorail whipping you down around it. Another view, again, the Science or Government Pavilion left there in sight in place today. I have no idea what this is. It looks literally like a giant an iron or something. Maybe somebody that was there will be able to tell us what it is. We see something that looks like a rocket Samsung over on the right. We'll get to look at that more in a moment. But whatever this one is, it has escaped me. Somewhere I've misplaced my Expo 93 guidebook. I've got to find it and go back and try to get it. Now, this was an interesting one. This was called Star Quest. It was done by Samsung. And it was a very, very popular pavilion simulating space flight. Again, another one that was left behind after the expo went. They put a lot of money into this particular pavilion, and the ride was still operated. I might have been shut down in the last year or two, but it's very, very popular pavilion. So that their theme was a universe where mankind's dreams and wisdoms unfold. And you would go into this and it had a multimedia show about space exploration, and a robot, he was called the Starfinder, would come out and say, we've got to get up to the space station, which I think was set in the year 2993, so 1,000 years or so into the future. But we've had problems up on the space station. We need to go and salvage it. So we have this really neat motion ride with chairs that move and everything, and come and help me go save the space station. So this was probably the most ambitious of the the national companies that participated out there. The Kia automobile pavilion was interesting. You see a very stylized image of a car up over the door. Today, Kia cars are very well accepted. Back then, nobody over in the West had ever heard of them. They went in here, and there's a really great movie out on YouTube of Expo 93, the official souvenir video. And I'll show a picture of the guy later on, but they show all sorts of concept cars. And then they show one concept car all of a sudden starts rising up. Some of them were tilting, as you see normally, they tilt left, they tilt right. This particular one rises all the way up on its rear bumper, but all of a sudden unfolds into a transformer. So if we all remember how the Transformers were so popular, if you get a chance to watch that movie, the look of awe on the kids' faces as watch this family sedan turn into a giant robot is truly pretty impressive. Again, another view of Star Quest from Samsung. They had a little playground area out here. This was a folk performance area. You could come out and they have different people performing, music groups, that sort of thing. They also had this kind of interesting silver ball area over here that photographers could come and get some great views bouncing off the surface of that. Do not know which shrine this is representing. Again, there's some big figure inside. Have to get to it later on. So I'll find that guidebook eventually. Another view of the Recycle Arts Pavilion. Most of this was, you went inside, you went down below, and you had this dome up overhead. Another view of telecom. You notice though, a lot of this, there's no big thing out here with luminaires like we had at the '64 World's Fair. They did a lot of indirect street lighting, towers that were very well masked, just some normal type light over back here in the area. But I had somebody ask me, with the absence of lights, was the place open at night? Yes, it was. It was just done with a very, discrete sort of lighting system. They were preparing for large crowds, so they put in very large walkways. They were also very smart. They put in a lot of trees, as you can see on the site. They also had water fountains, things like that to, keep people hydrated. Information booth. They made a big point of having a very computerized information system that you could get information on the site and also local area. They were trying to convince people to go see the local hot spas and other things around. So they served as both a Expo 93 information booth, but also as a Taejon area tourist center. Here you can get an idea of some of the lights that were around the facility. There's the Earthscape back behind it. Another view of Earthscape. Jump to the next batch of slides. I'm going to start in Seoul for a moment. This is the hotel the photographer stayed at, the Taejon Hotel in Seoul. As I mentioned, most Westerners stayed in Seoul and took a bus or a train out there. They were not going for the Airbnb because you ended up with a host you probably couldn't talk to, and eating food you probably didn't know what you were eating. So this was really big for the Westerners to stay out here. But that's the Capitol building of Korea. Again, South Korea to us, Korea to them. This here is a palace right in the middle of the city. Had been a royal palace. This is the gateway into it. And you can see the dichotomy of Korea, old and new, living side by side. This tower up here is a communication tower and also has a area. Bless you. Yeah. If you go up here to the tower, you can get a nice view of the city. And we're back out here to the local government. What they did for a really smart thing, again, they built a lot of these shared exhibit halls. This was the traditional handicraft exhibition hall. So they had a lot of stuff about what Korean industry was doing in terms of making tinware, baskets, ceramics, that sort of thing. And by building one giant shared hall, you could bring in all sorts of small manufacturers. So they did this with the countries. I had the number of countries here that they exhibited. They had 108 nations participate in it and 33 different international organizations. So they went really big with these idea of shared halls, which was really brilliant on their place to do it. Inside one of the pavilions, a traditional drum. You can see up here again the symbol that they adapted for the Expo symbol of the traditional Korean symbol. The drum here is in the back of a turtle, which is a bit of traditional lore about carrying the weight of the world. Little rest area gazebo outside. And then we're going to get in some of the international pavilions. Saudi Arabia went real bright, real bold in its colors, making sure that you could spot it. We see up here a Condori balloon floating up ahead. So again, if you look back, I remind you again of Expo 86, the pavilions look very, very similar to what they did there. Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, building their pavilion in. This is kind of interesting. We had seen last week how popular New Zealand was, and they were popular here again because they didn't get you to come into the pavilion to see the shows. They put a show outside, acting as sort of like a carnival barker to get you interested. They performed, I think it was about 8 to 10 times a day. They put on a pretty good amount of show. This next one, I really get a kick out of this gal's eyes. I don't know what she's staring at, but she's really transfixed on something out there. But I've been trying to match the pictures and see if they were the same people at Seville or at the year later at Expo, but I have not been able to determine that yet. But very popular, and they show up in a lot of pictures doing their performance. Peek inside the UK pavilion. This was a race car guy, Nick Mansell, I think was his name. He was a big Formula racer and had his car inside here. Do not know what this is representing. It is some sort of amazing contraption. It's probably recycling something, but I do not know. And this is weird. It looks like a guy, but then if you look at the face is rather strange. I can zoom in on it. So, you know, it looks like a mannequin, but, you know, why they're posed out here in German type garb, I don't know. And we'll see more of the German pavilion coming up. It was another popular pavilion. A very tall guy outside the Pakistan pavilion. He shows up, we'll see him later on again today, but he's the official greeter and doorman. I do not know what country they are from. If anybody recognizes the national garb, please do let me know. And more of the fake Germans sitting outside here. It's a very strange sort of looking thing. Inside Saudi Arabia, we have a model of Mecca, inviting people to come over there and explaining what the importance of the cube in the center is all about. This was part of Saudi Arabia, was by Aramco, their oil company, and they had all sorts of exhibits about pumping oil, shipping oil, processing oil, all the stuff that's given them all the wealth. Now I'm going to jump over to a different batch of pictures. Not all these have been fully restored, so some of the colors be a little off, but we'll still get the general gist of things. So again, a nice view showing just how rural this was outside at the time. A lot of these hills, of course, have been built over by now with things, but our tower is a great light. This was Technopia. Again, some of these slides that when they're scanned and you try to take out the dirt and scratches with the scanner, but the colors don't always immediately translate through. So they're on my list of things to do. I scanned these about 5 years ago and I haven't gotten to finish them all yet. But this was the theme of this one was with all your heart, find your dream. And this was a whole thing about communicating through electronics. They email, I mean, again, we all use this stuff today. take it all for granted. Well, this was all big stuff in 1993. Email was, it's hard to believe, not particularly new. But just like the 64 World's Fair, you could walk in, sit down at a terminal and put a query in, and it would tell you about this date in history or certain facts. And again, for a country like Korea, where most of the people had been working on farms, this was the first introduction they had to a lot of technology. A lot of people in Korea at this point in time did not have telephones, things along that line. So Technopia was a real eye-opener for a lot of them for the world of the future. Another grand view of the Science or Government Pavilion. The tower in its 1993 granite blocks. You can see part of the blocks here going up the wall. Samsung again. The cars again. I got a kick out of the kids with the numbers on them. I think they were making sure that, when you start with 22 kids, you come back with 22 kids, and when you line them all up, if number 17 is missing, then you know Johnny has gone lost and you know where to go find him. So kind of an interesting way of controlling your groups. Kind of nice fountain area, just giving it some water. I'm always a big fan of water works and things inside to help break up all the concrete and that. And again, in the center here, the sign for the Souvenir Pavilion. And on the screen, coaster, Earthscape. I have a concept art, if I remember at the end of it, I can show you how the Earthscape Pavilion was supposed to have gigantic mountains in front of it. And then people realized if you put the mountains too high, they A, block the pavilion too much, and B, they cost a lot more. So let's build lower type mountains. Another popular one was Russia. Russia had come over here and had a big exhibit about Space Station Mir. So it was a mock-up of it. You could take a tour of it, and they had a Russian airplane out front. Lots to do about Russian airspace progress and the work that they were doing. This is the Science and Human Being Pavilion, the big tower off to the left, and off to the right of it, the dome-shaped thing is the Korean Airline Pavilion. So pulling up my notes here, it's on the Science and Human Being. Was sponsored by Daewoo, a name that you may be familiar with from Korean business today. The theme is human science and how humans and science live together. It was a basement and 3 stories, and they had all sorts of things constructed of materials such as iron and aluminum. And they were very proud that everything built in this pavilion was done without water. So what sort of material, and I didn't know that you can make aluminum without water, but I guess you can. So they were trying to say that water is a precious resource and we can live without, wasting it all. Back to the North Gate, over to the Telecom Pavilion. Another one of the walkways here. And this is the Imagination Pavilion. Again, the name of the company out there is one that I would probably mispronounce just terribly, but their theme was Sion Kyun is how it's written out here in English. Their theme was Power, Dream, and the Future, and it would show you what imagination could do. And they had a very interesting computer graphic pre-show of going in. And again, it's hard to believe going back almost 30 years, computer graphics were in their infancy. They had a lot of computer power pressing it all out there and telling you how you can have, with the right imagination, you can dream almost anything. And then, as they say, if you dream it, you can build it. This is the Prosperity Pavilion, and we're trying to tell all Korean, of course, how prosperity is just down the way. And the government made a big point out of pushing the fact that this trade fair that they built out here is showing the Korea of the future. By the way, on this whole Expo 93, it made a profit, but people are still debating today how much of a profit it made, because they're still not sure how much the national government pumped into it to subsidize it to make sure that this thing was a success. But this was sponsored by the Korea Trade Promotion Corporation, and the subject was enjoying prosperity together, and they're showing how Korea is going to be a major country going forward into the world economy and bringing you forward. So another permanent pavilion built, very nice, clean cut design. You can also see a tram. What's a World Fair without tram? So we would take people from the parking lots or the west or east gate, take them around the lot and giving you a ride. That this is courtesy of the Automobile Pavilion. IBM had a really interesting pavilion. Again, computers being a big novelty for folks in Korea at the time, but this was not just an information thing. You could get information from all the question marks up above, but this was all done about mainframe computers and what they were able to do and put out into the world. This was the Eastgate structure, totally different sort of design. They did this on purpose. This was designed more of a traditional sort of Korean design on one end of the expo ground, the other being a space age design, showing that Korea was firmly rooted both in its past and in its future. This gate is still there today. A little bit of a closer up view of it. And this is the bridge going across the river, built with the Korean colors going across. Very nice design of these arches holding it up. Still there today. Matter of fact, the site now gets used very heavily for an industrial park, and how it has additional bridges that were built for the workload. Excuse me. Solar pyramid, solar power just becoming a big thing at that point in time. So you can get into this structure covered with solar panels and showing how the sun could turn on the lights and generate heat for you. Fountains out across the site. We got a couple of those. Misting. In the background, you have a big Bavarian type restaurant structure in the back. We'll see more of that coming up in the Expo Land structure. I'd love to know the story of this fountain. He looks rather fierce and he's spraying water out, turning this wheel around. More of the Expo Land. Resources Utilization Pavilion. This one kind of, when I first saw it, it looked to me like a flying saucer there in the background. But the theme of this one, as I turn through my notes, I'm trying to do this with a dog that has just jumped on my lap. This was built by the Ministry of Commerce, Industry, and Energy, and it was showing the theme was humans, the energy in the future, and how we live together. And again, this had solar panels up on the roof. Solar was a real big push that they were trying to make the impetus for getting into, both to sell, manufacture and sell solar panels to the rest of the world, but also a way that Korea could power itself, that they desperately did not want to get into nuclear power. So what can we do that we don't deplete the world's oil supply? Let's look into solar. Another view of the pavilion. Outside in the fountain, a bunch of koi having a nice day. Restaurants. There were a couple restaurants like this around. Most of the international pavilions did not have their own food facilities like they had done on other fairs, because that would have required additional cost in those prefabricated sort of structures you had seen. So you had, there was also a lot of question how much Western food would be popular. So there were a number of restaurants scattered around, and they made point on this one. You can see that it was a Korean restaurant to get the local trade. Nice view of the government pavilion lined up with the tower. Technopia we saw before. Another view of imagination. This is kind of neat. They had a little playground area outside for kids to burn off some energy, and ropes that they could swing on, and bouncing bridges and that. Just some benches the parents could rest at. And again, I mentioned 108 or so countries in there. You had all sorts of ones that were not traditional exhibitors at fairs, but this prefab design worked out great. So Bulgaria could be there, Poland, just right down the line. They even had pavilions that were even smaller than this, where you basically have a kiosk or a booth inside a pavilion. We'll see some of those coming up to encourage participation. So Czechoslovakia, Hungary, all sorts of countries participating. Get into the next box of slides. Souvenir stands, and they were pretty low key. If this United States, we'd have had souvenir stands all over the place. Well, let's keep in mind, with an average income of $7,000 per person per year, they didn't have the same buying power that we did for going and buying knickknacks that we really don't need. You know, they were focused much more on things they did need. So you did have souvenirs. One of the big things that we're really into was selling coin sets of Expo 93 design. I think they came in about 20 different coin sets, just like we have all the, you know, the quarters the United States done recently, take them home, put them in a drawer. And that was one of the big sellers, was the coin sets. More of the Westgate. Their version of the Unisphere, I assume. So everybody's getting lined up, getting ready to come inside the day. Everything's nice. Guards are keeping us there. The hostesses are coming out to meet us. You can see they're all walking out in the line and coming across, getting ready to man the turnstiles and welcome you in. And before the guest comes in, there's a formal greeting and everybody is welcomed to the day. Very nice little touch, I thought. I do not know what pavilion this was, a model of a city. If anybody recognizes it, please do let me know. It was a big stage area out there. They did a lot of performances, as you can imagine, mostly Korean performers. A few Western performers came by, but it was all sorts of different dance and song exhibits were done out there on the stage. It was also where they had the dignitaries come in for the opening and closing ceremonies, making speeches, as the rest of the grounds were covered in marchers and bands and that. Here's the photography dome that I mentioned. Kind of interesting. More koi. This one, I don't know exactly what this was, but it reminds me so much of, I think it was the Switzerland Pavilion at the Osaka Expo 70. Again, you wonder if they started cribbing designs. Marching bands, just like every other World's Fair of recent years, one of the ways to get people to come from a town is to invite that town to perform at the expo. So if I give free tickets to your band, your brothers, your cousins, your mothers, your uncles, and everybody will come to town for that day. So they're very big on doing specialized days for national days. You know, invite everybody to come in from Columbia Day or for, you know, different towns and that. So they were really big on having people come out and perform. Just an overall view of it. And again, you can see the light towers. This one, I'm not sure which country this was inside. You had cars that were exhibited from Germany. It's kind of actually interesting. In the official video, they make a mention of going to Germany and looking at the new Mercedes-Benz and raving over it being the most advanced car in the world. So it was kind of interesting that the Korean narrator was so effusive over how great the German cars were, when of course the Kia exhibit is trying to convince everybody that Korean cars are something to be interested in. And here's our transformer. He is stood up all the way down. If you look down, you can see the wheels of the car here. The body panels have opened. His arms are going to go up. His head turns. The video is really interesting. All sorts of lights in his head, and he's chatting away with everybody in Korean, of course, but down below, all the kids are staring at him. So it was kind of an interesting thing to watch. People seem fascinated with the local government pavilion. Main event hall, we had just seen some people out on the stage. This was a temporary structure built for Expo and taken down after it ended. More of the misting to keep things cool there. One end of the monorail station. The monorail is basically just a ride around. It did not give you any transportation into town or anything like that. Kind of an interesting design. This is the residential environment pavilion. And this was kind of interesting again, because Korean architecture was trying to make a real difference in, instead of using traditional materials, how do we use more modern materials that are, you know, cheaper and, well, not cheaper, but overall less dangerous to the economy or ecology, because they will last longer. So this particular one was built by the Korean National Housing Corporation, and it was done as what they called a breathing house. So in this particular one, you would have airflow being specified for the, you know, keeping you getting acclimated to the world around you. But things like air conditioning and stuff was really, really new to a lot of the folks over there. And this was a big exhibit that they had for modern designs for Korean housing. And this is when I got a kick out of currency culture. You wonder, I've mentioned in different World's Fairs, who you think you're selling to or what your customers were. So this was the Korean Minting Corporation, and their theme was the development of minting technology and the promotion of art culture. And they were showing you how they made money. So it was based around the Korean mint, how they made coins, and they had pretty popular, as I mentioned, these discs here are all supposed to be coins stacked up, and they showed you how they made money. And I guess they knew what they were doing because people did collect those 20 coin sets that they were manufacturing. So it was, you know, I guess great for creating souvenirs. I don't know how many other people came out and said, hey, I need them to make some money for me, but I guess I wouldn't mind having a mint in my backyard. This is another fun one. This is Latte. I'm not sure how they pronounce it. Lotte, Latte Fantasy World. And this was the world of refreshment with water, fun, vitality, and a new life. So this was a giant water odyssey thing. They had screens inside that they projected water on, sort of like we see Disney doing with Fantasmic, that sort of thing, or like Dancing Waters at the 64 World's Fair. So kind of interesting show that they had inside. Another view outside of it. Another restaurant, but this particular one is a beer hall. So you have a beer hall, right? So it's interesting how certain things speak the language internationally. A beer stein with the suds overflowing. So if you went inside, you had the Hof End restaurant. So you not only had beer hall, but you could get food inside. Or you could get Chinese food. So again, most of the restaurants kind of centralized over in the Expo Land area because the intent was, again, to keep them there for the theme park, which would reopen after the rest of the fairgrounds were cleared out. Folk performance area and outdoor amphitheater for, again, all the local groups to come in and perform. And if you're coming in, your relatives will come. The Dijon Pavilion, where Jim is waiting for us. More about the cars. Very low key. I mean, the shape of the car up here is kind of low key and a very small sign for key down below. So they didn't go with too much of a hard sell. Back to Samsung, back to Kia. I think all the flags up here on the roof, if I remember right, are the flags where Kia cars are being sold. That giant pagoda and the bell that we saw earlier. And when I do eventually find my guidebook, I will know what bell that was. And jump to some more slides. So here's Mr. Condori again, a cute little guy, a ticket booth. Actually behind him, we'll see a closer view. Currency exchange window here. And they made some nice use of flowers, and I mentioned the greenery and that. I think it really helped to make it less of a concrete built-up sort of area. Signage was very good. They had both English and Korean signs out there. They also went with the pictographic sort of thing. If you needed to find out where a restroom was or a place to get something to eat, they made it kind of interesting and easy to do. Back to Recycle Arts. Telecom. It wasn't a huge World's Fair, so you tend to see some of these pavilions, multiple times when flipping through them. Telecom again. The Nature and Life Pavilion. You can see I've got my work cut out for me. Some of these got a little scratched up. We'll make that all go away. Information booth. The Nature and Life Pavilion again, sort of a helix design at the sculpture outside. One thing, if you look at all the people in these pictures, you will notice again that most of them are Asian, very few Westerners. They figured about 2% of them came from the United States, but they were very happy because they were only hoping that 1% or so came. So they figured they overachieved their goal in that regard. Likewise, the United States government was very happy. They figured they got twice as many people through there on a day as they had been anticipating. You could get your official stroller of Expo 93 and rent it. Daewoo's Pavilion and Science and Human Beings, How We Coexist. Closer view here. Air-conditioned cars with solar panels up on top. I have a nice picture of the Korean Airlines one inside coming up. Mir again, they did not have the actual Mir space station because that was in orbit, but they had this mock-up that you could walk through and get a feeling of it. And then down below, they were showing with the early Russian airplane how they had, made the leaps in just a few years. This was kind of interesting. Space shuttles. This was part of the U.S. Pavilion. This had formerly been on display over at Kennedy Space Center at the facility in Florida. They brought this over to the Expo 93. You can see it actually had a set of stairs going up to it, and we'll see a view inside it. I don't know what's become of this mock-up since. I've been trying to find out where it went to or after. If anybody happens to know, or being a fan of the space program, I'd like to know. Which is the Canadian-built arm extending out. The cargo bay doors are open. And this was a pretty interesting piece that, again, the United States government could not put any money by law into it, but they could loan you something they already had. So if the folks from Amway could find a sponsor that could put the freight to bring this thing over there and erect it and operate it, it was fine with the government to loan it to you. They just couldn't fund it themselves. So it's kind of interesting to see the Space Shuttle Ambassador on display over there. This is the Expo Theater, a theater built for indoor performances, a lot of musical groups. The daughter's getting here, the dogs are letting me know. What's the mail delivery? So we had another Korean restaurant and the Korean area behind it. No, there's nothing going on, thanks. Okay, the world of materials again. Just a general view, looking over towards the Earthscape in the back. Korean Air being a big player trying to build up international commerce. The more international commerce they could generate, the more freight they could haul or more people they could haul back and forth. So they had a very good display about flying aviation. Again, most Koreans at this point, not trying to knock Korea in any way, but most Koreans had not been on an airplane. So to get a simulated air flight was a real kick, a real sense of enjoyment for a lot of the people. You would not look at this and say, oh, that speaks Maglev Train to me. But that's exactly what it was. You would go into this pavilion. They had a display about Maglev technology. And we'll see the train come up. This is not the Maglev Train. This won't, I guess this could be like Doc Brown's train from Back to the Future if it was levitated. This was a traditional steam engine on display. Steam engines were just being recently retired, and the last of it other than tourism. We'll see the Maglev Train coming up in a moment. This is, again, the station. You went in through this pyramid, and then you transition into this futurized Maglev Pavilion. Technopia again. Down below, by the way, they had this mural, and I think the mural is still there about different pieces of work that people could contribute to their view of life and being one united world through technology and communications. This fountain would look right at home if you were look at Expo Hemisphere 68. There was a fountain looked just like this. So again, I just marvel how many things they cribbed and took from different exhibits. The Skydream Pavilion. This was again the one for Korean Air. It was very, very popular. Had some nice lines in it and see in some pictures. And it was a great way to come in and introduce the whole concept of air flight into the Korean concept. They showed the theme of past, present, and future of aviation. They started back at the days again of early planes and taking us up through the world of going into space flight, and that steam train was also part of their exhibit to show again how technology used to be relying on one form of technology. Now with planes, we can go so much faster than the train would take you through the marvels of Korean air. Getting down near the end here. Daewoo. Here's another nice view of Korean air. You can see this was a very large pavilion, a temporary one built for Expo. I don't think this one stayed for the Expo Land years after, but they went all out. They were one of the major companies to participate. There's some nice street views of it. Notice, by the way, how everybody is pretty well dressed in these, and it's getting on in the winter. This ran from August and for 3 months. So by the end of it, it was starting to cool off, and we start seeing a lot more jackets and short days and lots of shadows. But they didn't want to go for the middle of the summer because everybody's busy with things like their crops and farms and that during the middle of summer. So get it more in the fall season when your crops have been harvested and people have the ability to get out and take a vacation. Vacation is very rare for Korean families at that point in time. But again, they specifically targeted their short 3-month window to when the majority of the population was going to be available to come to their fair. Build this thing in the middle of spring and summer, and everybody's busy on their farms. They're not going to be able to come out and see your exhibits. Electric energy, again, it's hard to believe a lot of people did not have electricity or not steady, reliable sources of it. So this was, again, you can see a very popular pavilion based on the line of people finding out that electricity was being more widespread out into the smaller rural communities, either through local generators or for an increasingly diverse set of national grid distributing electricity. More Prosperity, our tram taking us around. Nice view of the bridge across the river there. Another view of the Electric Energy Pavilion. Besides the tram, they also had some small air-conditioned buses, mostly for taking VIPs and that sort of thing around. It's interesting, as I mentioned, they tracked everybody that they counted as a VIP, how many they took, but they could tell you exactly how many lost children they had below age 12 and above and below. They could tell you how many people got sick, how many people went to the first aid, how many people were transported to the hospital. They did data mining that you can't believe. And one of the reasons was they figured this would not be their last World's Fair, and they used this one as an education for everything they could learn in this one. How do we do other international events? Like, gee, we'd like to get the Olympics back here again. We'd like to have a really big World's Fair. The more we know about what we did right or wrong in the past, the more we can try to do better with it in the future. So they went way out of their way on that. Another one of our little Condori guys, he was scattered in a couple different places around. It's interesting to see that although the fair was only 3 months, there's already parts of it showing some wear and tear. So I imagine a lot of people were sitting up here getting their pictures taken with him in the background and kind of wore away the paint on it. Looking up to the restaurant area. Again, the bird design that I mentioned, you can see how these suggested a bird's wings and its beak up here. International pavilions. Closer view again, so the Czechoslovakia and Slovakia next door. Again, great design to do these, that you could share these modules and bring all sorts of countries together really cheap. Back to the USA, one of the larger ones. And we're really glad, thank goodness, that Amway and the other companies came through. It would have been really embarrassing not to be there. Just looking down the length of the international ones, Holland being closest to the camera. Yet another Condori found. He seemed to be all over the place, didn't he? And they kind of grouped neighbors together. They had an Asian section, an America section, a European section, a Pacific Island section. Romania, kind of interesting design that they went for there. the EC back there. We had just seen them last week or so at the big pavilion with the tower they had in Expo 92. Now they're here in Expo 93. And this is one that was kind of interesting. Again, if you had countries that were really, really small, if you look at this one, the naming on Baltic Multinational Pavilion. So you had all these small Baltic nations. They couldn't even afford a traditional cube out there in the pavilion like Slovakia and some of the others had. So bring them in here into one of these pavilions and give them a stand or a kiosk or a table and that sort of thing. And that was again a way to have 108 pavilions instead of I think the 56 national ones for Expo 86. This is again another multinational pavilion, put people all together. This was a real interest to to the Korean pavilion. This was Germany. It wasn't East or West because the unification had happened. The wall had come down, and being a divided country itself, there was tremendous, tremendous interest in this pieces of the Berlin Wall they built, and also discussing with the Germans how they had approached and they had achieved unification of East and West. So a lot of publicity about unification, and a lot of Koreans interested in whether or not they were going to be able to reunite North and South Korea. As we know, it hasn't happened, but this became a very, very popular pavilion for people that were trying to figure out whether or not unification was possible and how they could do it. Kind of a cute little guy outside of Portugal here. And again, you put neighbors together, so you get Sweden together and Norway and Denmark. They're all kind of grouped together. And you go right from Denmark right to Spain because they're such neighbors, right? Well, they're European, so there they are. Menus in another restaurant. If anybody is hungry, we can see what we're having today. So we're having nice that you could put in English. So if you wanted somebody like my son would love it to get the bulgogi, and I'd probably go for the hamburgers. So we'd be heading right for the Shangri-La restaurant. If you look at these wooden towers, you might look back and say, gee, they look like the entrance towers at the Expo 62 in Seattle. So kind of interesting. Fujitsu, a name that we're all familiar with, a major company. This was Korea Fujitsu. They had their pavilion here. I think Fujitsu is a Japanese company, but they had a major Korean facility. And they made a point that this formal name was the Korea Fujitsu Pavilion. And the theme of this was human dreaming and computers. So we have computers, how they're used in civilization. And there was talk in here about how they're going to become a big industry for Korea. And they also discussed neural networks, taking computers that were linked together and using the combined processing power of my computer, your computer, and everybody else's computer to do something that was too big a problem for just one computer to be able to handle. So things like neural networks now, a lot of people are using these things to do like colorization of old movies or to crunch lots of data. Well, we think about the SETI project, the one where they were trying to find life on other planets and use your unused cycles of your screensaver, all these things for neural network. So this was done by a whole bunch of, this one is called the Challengers Pavilion. It was all done by a number of Korean countries that came together. And it had an aquarium inside. It was reading my notes here. Again, they went on with the importance of information and communications and the richness of human life under the theme of close the world closer to the future. So I think there were, I'm reading here, 7 major industries in there. Some of them you may recognize the names, Daycom, Pocari, others that I would absolutely mangle. But it was just as we had multinational pavilions, this was sort of like the Hall of Industry. Back in the 64 was for Hall of Education, or Pavilion of American Interiors. It was a way to get companies to share a building and come in together. Another entrance with Daycom sign letting you know what they've got inside. Jump to the next box. Same pavilion, Pocarium, the aquarium out there. more international. Again, bright colors, make everybody look in your direction, see what you got, come on inside and take a look. If we look at this one here, as the sign tells us, the Caribbean Multinational Pavilion. So again, all the islands that couldn't afford their own pavilion, come on in, we'll put you all here together. We also had a Vatican Pavilion, which was interesting, Korea being not particularly a very Christian nation, but the Vatican had a pavilion. They did not bring the Pieta over, but they had a number of other artworks and exhibits that they brought in. The side of New Zealand, the other side had the stage we've seen several times. Again, Egypt, all sorts of others. More lattice work. Tunisia, Morocco. The Cultural Exhibition Hall, another building built, and this was left behind for multi-purpose use after. Come in and have exhibits in here of artwork and also performances. Middle East Multinational Pavilion. And again, they were brilliant in doing this. I just wish Robert Moses had not been such a butthead in dealing with the ways of the world. I mean, if he had had more of this sort of concept to bring in more nations into the 64 World's Fair, it could have been a truer, more World's Fair rather than an industrial fair. So you could take your little plain face cube and you could put a little nice facade on it. So Malaysia did a nice thing here, building this outside the pavilion to get you to come inside. Some of these are self-explanatory. But again, look how just a little bit of three-dimensional artwork that takes to your flat structure and makes it into something pretty exciting. So a truly wonderful job they did for a small fair and attracting such a number of countries to participate. It was not cheap. Again, even if you had this pavilion, you now had to rent it. And I think they may have given them free rent. They may have done that, but you had to pay the utilities and everything, and you had to staff it. You had to build the exhibits, and you had to pay people from Indonesia to come over here for 3 months to staff this thing. So these things were not, cheap, for people to put together, but so many countries participated. It was truly a good testimony that they're planning. Again, we're inside the theater, mentioned just a moment or two ago. Not one you see at a lot of pavilions. My first thought when I saw this one was, I can finally meet the prince that's going to mail me all the money they've got there that they're holding for me in Nigeria. I can ask them what the delay is. This was an interesting one. This was a company that was getting into holograms that were real big. And you can see, again, a line. A lot of these pavilions did not have lines because they had enough to do that, people were able to distribute through there. But holograms was real interesting. The thing I get a kick out of is, if you look at the sign here, you're making this whole big sign. You think somebody could have proofread it for you, but think how many Japanese or Korean products we get even today in the world of computers, where you try to read the manual and figure out why didn't somebody just bother to proofread it. Pacific nations, done here with grass cloth outside. You can see the signs out here listing quite a few of the islands that were there. Again, Australia being one of the big ones. Japan, of course, couldn't go without being there. Canada was real popular. Canada had a movie inside that was a large screen presentation of flying over Canada, sort of a version of soaring, but done without the whole motion thing. They had a lot of movies that were done in Expo 93, because again, building a ride like General Motors did for the 64 World's Fair with chairs and things going through, it's real expensive. You can put together a movie much more economically. So iWorks had 2 different pavilions with 70mm projectors. You had a number of different pavilions. You had IMAX, Super IMAX, all sorts of things put in. And Canada's film was the one that got the most attention that I found in different talks about people's visits there. So long line for it and very popular. It's another one sponsored by the National Film Board of Canada, if I recall. China, that would of course be in mainland China. Austria was kind of cute. The guy up on the ladder and the guys in the sign painters, they were mannequins putting the last minute touches on it. Austria is a nation on the move. We're not sleepy little Austria. We're still moving. We're still growing. We're still getting big. So we're right up to the minute. Kind of an interesting little concept. Again, just more of the international area. United Kingdom. That car we mentioned was inside. They had a kind of a lower key approach in this than some of the other fairs they had been at. This is the Americas Multinational Pavilion. So we've already seen the United States, we've seen Canada, but if you want to see, and it was some of the nations, Panama had its own, some of the others, but again, down in South America in particular, they had budget issues, so you could come here to the Americas Multinational Pavilion. Russia had a pavilion which was separate from the Mir space exhibit. So this was more, again, why you would want to come and do business in Russia, why you would want to buy things from Russia, why you would want to sell things to Russia. Another one of the multinationals. That's it for this box. And up on the roof of Korea with their exhibit on travel. Big sign here, we're going to do a fair about recycling. What do you do with all your trash that you have generate during the fair? So you can take it right here to an on-site recycling center and be part of the whole recycling phenomena. And more of the garden work outside. Little sailboat model. Automobiles again. I think it's real interesting. Not a lot of glitz and glamour or giant in-your-face signs, sort of a low-key design, which I thought was very interesting that they did that. Again, some of the multinationals, as I mentioned, Panama had its own, but next to it was the Central and South American multinationals. Switzerland. Down to South America again. Another snack bar. More of the Scandinavians. Back to New Zealand. Of course, good old American JBL speakers off to the left there. So America got represented in a couple spots. Or doorman from Pakistan. He looks fierce, doesn't he? But big guy, big guy. Going out towards the East Gate again. And as I mentioned, here we're going across the island. This was all raised flat ground on the other side for building out, knowing that they put the eyes of the world on Dijon and industry is going to be coming here. So they're all set, ready to go. Bridge over from the parking area going in. These are some views looking down from the tower. We're going to be looking at some nice views out over the ground. So you can see band that we saw earlier was out marching. Now they're out here performing for the crowd. During the opening and closing ceremonies, all the nations came and performed and marched in uniform, just like they do for the Olympics. They had a giant parade of the nations as they came in, and for the closing ceremonies, they had another one as they went out right here in this spot. Looking down at the Peace and Friendship Pavilion. But these give you some excellent views of how all these prefab pavilions were being able to be built there. And they stacked them in pretty good. They really made very good utilization of the space out there. You can see in the distance, Dijon itself being built out there, and more the river coming by and the expansion coming out. But still a lot of greenery in that being out on the peripheral. Looking over towards the amusement area, Expo Land. And I think if we zoom in on this one. Yeah, Souvenir Pavilion. So let's all go shopping. Let's make sure we get some of those good dolls there. And you still see the glare. We're inside the upper observation area here looking out. Electric energy pavilion. And the city off in the background getting closer and closer to it. The main entrance plaza coming in from the bus parking. These are, again, I mentioned the sail-like structures for some of the international pavilions that they didn't do just the one design. They broke it up so you had a little bit more eye candy to look at. All the nations that were participating in Expo down at the Flag Plaza. I've got maybe one box left to go here. Yes, I do. Granite fountain showing, the water is bubbling and you could reach out there and rotate that around. Somebody's going to have a nice lunch here, huh? Somebody's makes me hungry looking at it. The IBM Pavilion. And just some trash cans, balloons, just odds and ends around the site. Monorail Station. And here's the Maglev train. Just like most of the other trains that have done Maglev, didn't actually take you from point A to point B. It took you from A to A, but you could go on board. I don't think they charge for this one. Some of the others, they would charge you at I'm trying to remember in Expo 85 if they charged us for it or not. I just remember it was really hard to get a ticket on it for Expo 85. But again, this Maglev going to be the train of the future. I don't think there's any of them running in commercial service around the world, so we're still hoping that they come. But this was a popular exhibit, zipping you around and giving a demonstration of it. Currency exchange, how many won to the dollar or the yen or anything else that they were doing at that point in time. Screen machine. This is kind of interesting. If you look at this and you don't say, oh, World's Fair, right? Well, again, this was a theme park, built as a theme park, and it stays a theme park. And they had exhibits exactly like this that would turn into one of the more popular exhibits at the '62 Seattle World's Fair, their Flight to Mars fun house. So traditional fun house we'd see in county fairs over here, and you could go over there and have a great time at it. And more of the rides that you had over there. Again, they had a ride just like this at Expo 86. Another one like it at, a number of different fairs and things had. There was one just like this done at the one in, New Orleans. So if you go up on the Ferris wheel, you might as well take advantage of getting some views of the facility and the city just behind it. Restaurant area, the German sort of theme. And again, this was all built as a theme park. So not unlike the lake amusement area at the '64 World's Fair. You have a log flume ride. You had all sorts of different things out there to entertain people. And again, this is still there today. You can go and take a ride on it. More of the marching bands, again, bringing performers from around the country. This was inside a garden area that they had here to try to convince people that you could do indoor gardening, grow plants, They were into hydroponics and other odds and ends. So a modern way of, and you have a place like Korea where the winters are so harsh, it stops your growing season. We'll start thinking more about greenhouses and doing your farming and your stuff indoors, and become better for the world, because we could take the more food and distribute it, but also better for you as a farmer, because you could have your property generating 12 months a year. A couple last views of the site in general. Bulk performance going on. Science and Human Being Pavilion. And we're up inside the space shuttle. So again, this was a great exhibit. Had been on display at Cape Kennedy. It was here, and if anybody's able to locate the Space Shuttle Ambassador, please do let me know. And one last picture, you go from the dichotomy of the Space Shuttle and its amazing technology, and then you had local performances, and they were done here for this particular one 3 times a day. What I got a kick out of, and again, I don't speak or read Korean, but you had to make sure you say Korean 11:30 and just say 11:30 in English. So I made sure there was no doubt what time the times were. So that is our trip back to Expo 93. And now I'm sure that linked, okay, Carolyn, I knew Carolyn would be the one to find out about it. So the Orbiter Mock-up Ambassador, I don't have the time to read it right now, Carolyn, but what does that tell us about it?
Well, it actually doesn't say exactly where that ended up, but it said it was the inspiration for the one that did end up traveling around. Nobody seems to know exactly where it went.
How do you lose something like a space shuttle, It's probably sitting in some government warehouse.
Well, it basically sat there for a while, and then I found another conversation there's one fellow who used to work at Kennedy who thinks it may have just been abandoned in place and finally torn apart and put into other mock-ups, because they were recycling mock-ups. But this at least gives you a little idea of the background on it.
Great, thanks. I'll take a look at that. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's not definitive, but there you go. Yeah.
Great. Don said if it was Amway's Pavilion, it should have been a pyramid. Well, there were a couple other pyramids there. Maybe they were pyramided out. The copper-colored building behind the recycled pavilion, we probably answered that later. That was the Samsung Pavilion Star Quest. Oh, and you see it right here. Okay, that's the trouble. I see the chats after it. The stylish car reminds me of the day the Earth stood still. Reminded me of one of the James Bond movies, the Lotus Esprit or something. Big department store. Okay, thank you. Gold Star, no, Gold Star is what you call it, American. It's a Korean company with an Americanized name. Yeah, and now they're LG for Life is Good. So everybody was buying Gold Star appliances, and now you buy LG. Yep, visitors is spelled with an E. Well, maybe that's the way they do it. In today's world, everybody gets a trophy, right? It's how you feel you should do it. 3 mag trains in existence: Japan, South Korea, and China. Oh, I'd like to go ride one of them someday. Everybody talks about this bullet train boondoggle we're doing out here in California. At one point, they discussed maglev. Today, we're going to be surprised if it actually moves at all from point to point. Building a train from Bakersfield to Merced, which I think there are 6 people a year that go between Bakersfield and Merced, but it's only, it's really just they build this whole thing. It's going to be $33 billion to take you from LA to San Francisco in 2 hours. Now it's going to be $100 billion, and it's going to go from Bakersfield to Merced. I mean, it's just government at its best. It's just wonderful. But anyway, any thoughts people had on Expo 93? It's kind of an interesting little 3-month thing that they put an awful lot of time and effort on it. They pronounced a financial profit on it. Again, how much that's cooked in the books, I don't know. But they were very, very well pleased that they anticipated 10 million visitors. They got 14 million. They anticipated 1% would come from the United States. They got 2. I mean, whatever the numbers were, it kind of did well. Despite, had most of you ever heard of Expo 93 before? No, I mean, it just was not, discussed or advertised here. My sister-in-law is Korean, and she was actually in Korea at that time. They had another trade fair that she worked at. My brother first thought she might have worked at it, and I was real interested trying to pick her brain on it. But, it was basically, a total non-event here in the United States. I mean, we have barely heard about Expo 92 in Seville, which is a big fair. Expo 93 was just, it came and went. And just like here in the United States, I mean, have you seen anything for Dubai?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there's people on like Facebook talking about it, but yeah, I don't see any billboards or television commercials or anything trying to convince me to go to Dubai.
Well, no, if you follow the stuff, you know it. I knew Seoul from 93 because I was starting graduate school that year and already had, my design theory in mind of what I was going to do for my master's degree. So, but if you follow, you know it. But I guess advertising wise here, generally, no, it's not really.
No, very, very low key. I mean, even here in LA, we had very little mention of Expo 86 up in Vancouver. And, I was lucky my job took me around. Guard dogs. Carol's seeing what is upsetting them now. Oh, another package delivered. Yeah, Expo 86 was advertised big up in the Seattle, Vancouver area, but down here in LA, I think I saw maybe one ad for it the entire time that it ran, and which was enough to say, hey, I got to find some reason to go, Vancouver as I go someplace else. But it looks like it was a fun event, and like I said, going through the reports, they used to have an official Expo 93 site, which they let go a few years ago, which was too bad because they had a lot of the statistics and information, and I was able to glean a lot of it back from the Wayback Machine for going back. But the United States government did put out a booklet which went through all the glories of building the pavilion. And on the back page, you see it was the booklet was sponsored and printed by Amway, so no wonder they were touted so well within it. But that's still the situation we're in today. Even in Dubai, the United States government's not allowed to put money into it, so you have to have a corporate sponsor and people going around. There was a lawyer, I forget his name, led the U.S. effort for Expo 93, and he did a really nice job as the Commissioner General of the U.S. Pavilion. And it like I said, it was well received.
You would, go ahead.
I was just surprised at how much of it they kept. It was a very short-lived fair, but you said a lot of those buildings are still there, which is strange for World Fair.
Yeah, a number of them were just torn down about 2-3 years ago. What happened was, again, this is where they got themselves in trouble with the BIE. They built these pavilions to be used in a what they call Science City, and the BIE has all sorts of rules on what you can do in post-fair reuse or whatever. And I guess if you tell the BIE in advance, it's one thing. If you beg forgiveness later, it's another. But they got upset, and if you start reading different things, they were really talking about unsanctioning it up to as close as about a month before it opened. They were really upset. But they tore down all that temporary stuff, the international pavilions and that sort of thing. And then they operated it as it was, I forgot what company. They went and put a bid in to open up a theme park at Expo World in '94, and it operated for a number of years. And as you can imagine, the buildings started getting worn out, torn down. Things like the Space Quest exhibits started having some mechanical issues, that sort of thing. So a couple of years ago, they gutted most of the site, and it's now used for the Institute of Creative Thinking, I think it's called, something like that. It's a Korean name. I'm not sure how well it translates. But Expo Land, the theme park, is still there with the screen coaster and that sort of thing. So the east and west gates are still there, and you can walk in through that area for free. You have to pay to go to the Expo Land, but the Star Quest Pavilion is still there. It looked a little ratty in the pictures I saw that people had posted on Flickr from a recent trip, but still there. More of it survived than not. And like I said, about 4 years ago, they went through a major rehab and tore out the stuff to redevelop it for a modern think tank area. Yeah, surprised to see how much of it had lasted all those years.
Yeah, I'd like to mention the English signage. I went to Seoul on business several times in the 90s, and they had a lot of English signage, especially on the subway. It was very easy to travel around. And a couple of times, I guess I looked a little confused, although I wasn't. And people were very friendly. They would step up and try out their English to ask if you needed help.
Yeah, I had the same thing in Japan. With Japanese subway, every other sign is in English. So, you get someplace and it was fairly easy to figure out. And they had, color coded the lines in that. But I saw the same thing in Japan. I would pull out a map and 8 people would run over to tell me where I should go. And it was really interesting. We were there one day. We went to, they were determined to show me everything you could see in Tokyo in one day. So we went to like the sumo wrestling, and we went to Kabuki theater and everything. But we were trying to get on a train, and and I may have mentioned this when I talked about Expo 85. They have people that push you on the trains to fit everybody on. And there were a bunch of sumo wrestlers getting on the train, and we just followed them because everybody was making way for them. And my guide was very, very happy that, we gave you to get a spot on the train. And then to her horror, she found out we were on the wrong train, but we had a spot on it. So I actually looked up, and as we were going out of the station, I could read the sign in English, and I said, "Why are we going to so and such?" No, she had put us on the wrong train, so we had to get back off. So, but yeah, it's the English sign language makes it a big difference. And I found that when I got out of Tokyo, the signage went to mostly just Japanese. So did you get to any of the smaller towns in Korea, Wayne? Was English prominent outside of Seoul?
Did not, so I don't know. My experience in Japan was quite the opposite of yours. We were in a brand new town that was being built as a convention center, and the hotel had just opened, and they had no one on the staff who spoke English. And I had one free day to go into Tokyo, and I got lost coming back. I took the wrong train, and halfway back to the hotel, I realized I didn't recognize anything. So I turned around and went back to the junction point. But all of my exploring of Tokyo was completely random, and I happened upon the NHK Museum, the national broadcaster of Japan. So that was the highlight of my day.
Well, I was very lucky. I had an office in Japan, and all the staff, of course, Japanese, but they were, my dad worked for a Japanese company, and he got, very used to going over there and dealing with it. So one of the first things I did was I went to the hotel, and they wrote on the back of a piece of paper, I need to get to the, Imperial Hotel, and they wrote it in Japanese. So if I got any place, and I got some places where nobody spoke any English whatsoever, I would take out my piece of paper, give it to them. And the funny thing was, of course, they would all start telling me in Japanese how to get there. No, and point, show me, point. And they would take you by the arm and walk you down to the train station and, tell you you're getting in the number 3 train or whatever. But I tell you, I kept that piece of paper. It was like, my passport and my get me back to my hotel piece of paper in my pocket the entire time. And it worked a couple of times because I couldn't ask anybody. They didn't understand what I was saying, but the piece of paper sure helped.
How old were you then?
How old was I? 27, 28, something like that when I first went over.
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah, a couple of years ago when I went to Hong Kong for a meeting, I wanted to go out to Disney, and they basically gave me a card at the hotel that on one side said in English where I wanted to go, and then the other side said it in Mandarin. And they do
Yeah.
the same thing in Shanghai. If you want to go somewhere, they give you a card that says, here's how I get back to my hotel. And you just show that to somebody and they'll point you in the right direction.
I had my business cards printed in Japanese back, it's a big thing. But in Japan, I don't know what they're doing either. Sorry, we've been binge watching The Amazing Race, and they have a thing this past week we're watching where one of the things was your challenge is to act as a Japanese taxi driver and get people from point A to point B. And in Japan, they don't do things the way we do with, 123 Main Street. Everything is done 6 blocks from this and 4 blocks up and 7 buildings in. So the trouble is they move things. So if the old address was 7 blocks up from the pagoda that's no longer there, the locals all knew that there was 7 blocks from the pagoda that's no longer there, but somebody else doesn't. So they would write down, because I'd say I have to go to a meeting at so and such, and they'd write down all these laborious instructions for me of how to get to the office or something. And they go out to the taxi driver, and there were some days I started recognizing, just like you, Wayne, this isn't the way I've gone before. I take the same taxi to the office every day, but I've never seen this part of Japan. It's like, tell the guy here, and it was a challenge. Their street numbering is totally different than ours.
Bill, you had mentioned earlier about how you wished Robert Moses had maybe considered the more pavilion type concept that was used here in Seoul. One of the things I wanted to bring up was that there's a 30-year difference between the two, and the concept of the mega malls and the shopping centers was not as prevalent back in the early 60s and was just starting to grow, as had already been developed by the time the 90s rolled around with mega malls and things of such. So I believe perhaps maybe the designer's concept of utilizing these shopping pavilion type spaces to incorporate smaller countries to come in rather than having them build separately their own pavilion at an enormous cost was a great idea. But I didn't know if that was something that you had maybe considered, that the 30-year time difference and the development of mega malls and now malls all over the place that weren't really there in 1960s. The strip malls were beginning to develop, but not necessarily things like this.
Think back to 64 though. You had the house, you had the Pavilion of American Interiors, you had the Better Living Center, you had the Hall of Education. He did it for industry, but he wasn't willing to do it for countries. And part of his thing was he wanted the money for the rent for the countries. And that's why I got him in trouble with the BIE, is that the BIE says you can't charge rent for a World's Fair. I think you can charge rent for an exhibition like Expo 83, but you can't do it for a World's Fair. Okay. So he had absolutely just locked on. He thought all these countries would just pay him anything he wanted for it. And that was a big issue. I mean, think how good it could have been if you had instead of the House of Good Taste. Well, that was a different thing. The Better Living Center was crap. I mean, it was a terrible pavilion. But if they had used that pavilion and used that as the Hall of South America, it would have really. I mean, I love Moses. I still think he did a job that nobody else in the United States could have done. To put that fair together. But I just wish he had been a little bit more flexible. And I really would have liked to have seen more international pavilions at that fair. But I never thought I'd ever go to any of them. So it was. To us going to New Jersey was a big event. So, the thought of, actually, God, going to some of these places, wow, just crazy. But
Well, I can go to the local flea market now and see all the international stuff that I could see at a pavilion these days, or at a World Fair these days. So times change
yeah, it certainly has.
if you look at it in that way. I mean, because part of it, really, what the countries are doing is they're, in the pavilions and in the World Fairs, they're celebrating their country, their land, and their goods and their industry.
Mhm.
And like I said, the local flea market now has all that. And I can go to, and the dollar store has that. Go to the Dollar Tree, I can get all that stuff there. So
Well, I don't think you see too many people doing the dancing and singing the songs. Maybe your Dollar Tree's got a little bit more entertainment than ours, but I haven't been to one since the pandemic.
And,
we
and I
have
was
too
going to
many
say,
people-
excuse me, I was going to say, you were asking about the two fellows from the one particular country that you couldn't identify. To me, it looked like they were from Egypt or Morocco, one of the two. That's the first thing that kind of came into my mind. I didn't know if you had any better thought than that, but when you were thinking that you didn't know, I said, looked like they were Egyptian to me, maybe.
Could be, I don't know. Again, so, I posted on, Facebook pictures of different things for like a national group at the 39 World's Fair. And people can instantly tell you the difference between this country and that country. Being Irish, I only know if we're dressed like leprechauns, then I know it's Irish gear. But, for the rest of the world, whether it's from Slovakia, Slovenia, I'm not that easy to determine. And other people can start telling you, oh, that's from the city of so and such. That's their traditional thing they wear. So hopefully someday we'll see this video and I'll go, oh yeah, those are the guys that live down the block from me and that's what they wore. So,
Yeah.
well, appreciate folks joining. Like I said, a small fair, so we got a small crowd. Next week I may do Expo 98. I'm not sure yet. Again, we're getting more and closer to more modern times. Or I'm still trying to negotiate with the guy for the hemisphere talk, and we're trying to get that in place. There was a fellow that just did a talk on Israel at World's Fairs. Did anybody happen to see that early this week? Yeah, Wayne. I'm thinking about getting him to talk, and I only caught the tail end of it. So thinking about trying to. He said he'd be glad to come and chat with us.
I think that would be great. It's aimed at the Zionist organization to some extent, but he's a great speaker and lots of details about the participation in fairs.
I was pretty impressed when they got to the Q&A section that he really seemed to know his stuff. So I'll get in touch with him and see when I can get that worked out with him. I helped him with some pictures and stuff for the the different pavilions, and that it seemed like he had it really down pat. So we'll get something. 2 weeks from now, I got an event. We have a Granada Hills Street Fair, and I have to go play traffic control for that. So we'll do something next week. That week, I'm gonna be sitting there staring in envy at the beer tent and beer garden, unable to participate unless I take my uniform shirt off. We actually had a volunteer about 3-4 years ago. We did bike patrol and we finished for the day. So, okay, everybody's done. And my sergeant had a heart attack. He turned around, there's one of the volunteers having a beer in uniform. It's like, no, can't be time out. So we have to have a strict, and I get free tickets because I'm one of the sponsors for this street fair. I get free tickets for the beer garden. So if anybody's in LA and you want free beer 2 weeks from now, let me know.
By the way, we'd like to know what kind of topic you're going to present for the Zoom talk on Saturday, December 25th.
I'm just going to be here opening all the presents you guys are sending me. So, December 25th. I don't know. I'm getting to. I keep joking. If I run out of topics, I'm going to be showing my kids' baby pictures. So.
By the way, Bill, how did the the guy who had locked himself in the house last week?
Oh, last week.
How'd that resolve?
Yeah, he finally came out after about 7.5 hours. and they took him into custody, and he was it was a tough one because he was wheelchair bound, so you then just can't put him in the back of the patrol car, and you had to get him there. But yeah, he was having a mental breakdown issue, and luckily the SWAT team came, they responded, and they negotiated with them. And I don't think sometimes they do things like they start turning off the power, and that sort of, if it's really hot day, they turn off the power so they can sweat them out without the air conditioner or whatever. I don't think they got to that point. But we have what's called a mental evaluation unit. The MEU came out with the SWAT team, and one of their negotiators was able to convince the guy to calm down. So thankfully it worked out, and thankfully I didn't have to be there, because I finished this and I was like, oh, please don't make me go. And by that time they started bringing down the containment. They normally go for a pretty big area, figuring if the guy shoots, how far is the bullet going to go. And by that time, they decided he wasn't going to shoot anybody, so I didn't have to go, which was great. So
I hear it worked out well.
Yeah, it was just, we were watching the news last night. Somebody took somebody hostage last night, and the SWAT team had to go and get him out. It was I don't know how they do it. Oh, Beth, you got the new Claude Coates book. They owe me one for contributing to it, and I haven't seen it yet. So hope you enjoy it. Claude was a great guy, and super patient. I showed up back at WED as a starry-eyed, brand new guy, and tell me about the World's Fair. That was all old stuff. Let's talk about new stuff. No, I want to talk about the World's Fair. Okay, so many of the old Imagineers were amazed that anybody even remembered any of that stuff. It was only I got there in 73, or 76 rather, so it wasn't that long ago. But Claude was a real gentleman, super guy.
I was glad to see I'm actually one of the contributors as well. I got them up 2 days ago. You should be getting yours soon, I think. But yeah, I mean, I was discouraged. I never saw much about him. I'm really glad to see this book on him, because he was very influential. He contributed to a lot. So yeah. I'm looking forward to reading it.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Beth, for not just turning off the thing and reading your new book. So appreciate it. Well, I'll come up for sure with the theme for next week, and put that on the page, and then I'll get this video up there. And I hope everybody has a great week. Where our heat wave, knock wood, seems to have broken here temporarily. So going to go outside and enjoy Indigenous People Day or something on Monday. So great. See you all soon, and take care. Thanks for participating.
Thank you, Bill. Good talking.
Thanks, Bill. Good talking. Talk to you later.